A lone wolf terrorist prepares to publish a manual for murder and then strikes for the first time, killing 8. On an island called Utoya nearby, hundreds of young people think they're safe.
So we're just gonna stay at the island, which is the safest place at the whole world right now.
In fact, they were on the most dangerous place on Earth.
Conversations that I had by SMS with their kids, saying there are dead bodies around me, we're being shot at. Don't call, I love you, Mom.
Anders Behring Breivik had no intention of escaping. He wanted maximum publicity. But that surrender won't come until another 20 people are killed. Breivik's actions will speak louder than his words.
This is propaganda by deed.
Breivik worked meticulously on a plan which he believed had 1,000 years of history behind it. He was a crusader for death. As dozens of young people swim through icy waters to escape a killer dressed as a policeman, others cower in buildings to avoid him.
There were about 10 bodies in the corner. I don't know how many were dead and how many were alive. There was a pool of blood. The corner of the room was just a bloody mess of just a heap of bodies.
Outside, still more face the desperate choice, dive in or die. And all the while not knowing whether a person dressed in police uniform can be trusted.
Then we heard the shooting get closer, you know, and far away you could hear people scream because they were shot. You could hear that, and you could hear that bodies fell down. So I finally, you know, decided to swim.
The killer, Anders Breivik, had been planning on the atrocity for 9 years. From 2008, his crusade against Islam and those he suspects of collaborating with Muslims is meticulously recorded for posterity in what he would describe as his manifesto, officially entitled 2083, a European Declaration of Independence. Where there should be a joint anti-jihad action by the affected nations, there is no action. In the years before he was to murder 77 people, Breivik used online forums to debate his nationalist views with scholars like Professor Lars Guller, always careful not to appear too extreme.
He challenged me on some of the classical ideas about Muslims in Europe, that we have a growing number of Islamic no-go zones in European cities. And he said that we have now 20, 30 such areas in Norway, even in Oslo, and they are growing by the day.
Breivik writes his 1,500-page manifesto explaining how he sees himself as a member of the Order of the Knights Templar, the Christian military sect which pledged to destroy Islam 1,000 years ago. The moment Breivik seems to have flipped from frustrated nationalist to lone wolf terrorist came even earlier. Ethnic cleansing and genocide of Bosnian Muslims at the hands of Bosnian Serbs prompted NATO to act. Norway agrees to send troops. For 20-year-old Breivik, it's the ultimate betrayal. The Serbs were the good guys at the front line of a centuries-long war with Islam. Christian Europe, and Norway in particular, was fighting on the wrong side.
He comes across as someone who is passionately obsessed with this idea of an imminent Muslim invasion of Europe.
Anders Breivik decides he will single-handedly begin a 21st century mission against Muslims, and he will warn those who don't share his views that they too are legitimate targets. He will publish online his terrorist teaching manual of hate, alongside a video outlining his operation. Explain what you've done in an announcement distributed prior to the operation. The promotional tool to drive people to his website will be a spectacular terrorist stunt. Once you decide to strike, it's better to kill too many than not enough. You risk reducing the desired ideological impact of the strike.
The whole purpose of the violence is to draw attention to his writing. The idea of bombing and killing is for more people to read his manifesto.
Some innocents will die as they are simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. Get used to the idea. The needs of the many will always surpass the needs of the few.
A really close friend of mine got shot of him. It was near this pump house. It was a place a lot of people were killed. She was shot and then she fell in the water. And she survived. When he shot at people, he shot more times just to confirm that they died. But I think he just thought that she was dead.
How could this happen? How could Norway produce such a guy? You know, how is this possible?
Anders Behring Breivik is born in winter 1979. Like any other baby, he's adored by his parents.
Breivik was born into a privileged family, father being a diplomat, the mother of a good, renowned background in one of the best parts of Oslo.
But the influential, well-off family don't stay together for long. After a stint at the country's London embassy, Breivik's parents divorce. Anders moves with his mother back to Norway. Initially, staff like Paul Storbeckert spot nothing unusual about the boy. Anders blended really well with the other children. He didn't make much of himself in either a bad or a good way, so I didn't take much notice of him. I remember little of Anders because he wasn't the kind of boy who made a lot of himself, but I can remember maybe a small, flimsy boy. With his father now remarried and in France, Anders is occasionally sent away from Norway for extended periods to stay with him. By the age of 6, he's exhibiting serious behavioural issues in the classroom. He's unruly, aggressive, has a low attention threshold. When Breivik is 12 years old, he has to deal with the breakdown of another relationship between his father and stepmother, of whom he's become very fond. His mother also remarries. An unsettled domestic life and bad behaviour from Anders seem to go hand in hand. At 15, telling some in his class at school that he wanted certainty in his life, Breivik turns to God. He insists on being confirmed in the Lutheran Church of Norway. It is his first very public statement of beliefs. Later he will post views on Christian fundamentalist websites and in his manifesto of the kind of God that he worships. Psalms 144. Blessed be the Lord my strength, which teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. Clearly, this is not a pacifist God we serve. Breivik's God is Christian, and as his manifesto will demonstrate, one convinced of the need to defeat what he describes as Islamization. Europe is turning Muslim. Get out and move to Australia or New Zealand. Time is of the essence. We only have a few decades to consolidate a sufficient level of resistance before our major cities are completely demographically overwhelmed by Muslims. But it isn't exclusively Muslims who Breivik fears. It's also the politicians, young and old, who support their acceptance and admission into European society. You cannot defeat Islamization or halt the Islamic colonization of Western Europe without first removing the political doctrines manifested through multiculturalism or cultural Marxism. By 2000, Breivik had decided to act against Islam. His first action in his crusade is to change his appearance. He's concerned about his looks.
He is supposed to have done some plastic surgery with his nose or something. There are specifics in the manifest about how you should get a tan from a solarium, maybe even use some makeup to look good for the pictures that you leave behind after you've gone through an operation like this.
He spends time bodybuilding and weight training, following a strict regime of 6 a.m. workouts. Breivik is becoming a young man who does most things to extreme. He's decided his destiny is to become one of the Knights Templar. You're going to have to go through a physical transformation period to prepare yourself as a Justiciar Knight before you engage in armed resistance.
He's trained a lot. He really wanted to be perceived as a really, really healthy and by that also powerful person.
Around this time, Breivik suffers rejection once again. He should be enlisted in national service, but when he goes for the mandatory assessment, he's deemed unfit and exempt from conscription.
National service is for every boy in Norway from your 18 to 28. You have to 1 year in national service.
Breivik tells the world that avoiding national service was his plan all along. Self-delusion becomes a common theme in his life. He sets up a business and boasts that he is a millionaire with a successful customer relations call centre.
When he failed miserably trying to run a business and ended up by being bankrupt, he didn't have enough funds to provide for himself. He then had to move back with his mother, and she provided for him. She had him stay in his own room. He played online games mostly.
Anders Breivik is developing a view of the world far removed from reality. He's planning on making sure that those around him know exactly what that view is, by carrying out the worst terrorist atrocity ever in the small, beautiful country of Norway. Anders Breivik has perfected his image. He is obsessing about a world of just knights of whom he is a leader and who are ready to fight against Islam. In his manifesto, Breivik wants to present a Norwegian warrior's face to the world, one of which he's proud.
He has pictures taken in a professional photo studio before the operation, pictures that he includes in the manifesto.
By now, Breivik also sees himself as the big shot in the political circles of Oslo, a member of the Progress Party, the conservative right wing. In Breivik's manifesto, Göran Kalmyr is named as his political arch-rival for not being extreme enough. Not that Breivik revealed his feelings.
I remember him as a little bit shy and not very active in meetings. I can barely remember him. Breivik seems to me as just like a normal person from the west of Oslo city, a little bit better dressed, speaks nice and polite. There wasn't anything unusual about him, as I can recall it.
Using pseudonyms to remain untraceable, Breivik lives an online existence. The internet gives him a platform to debate and preach his right-wing ideas without any real human interaction.
That he'll be much more active on the internet, and of course everybody can be active on the internet. You don't have to sit face to face and arguing.
Breivik is careful not to reveal his real name on the sites and lets no one know either about his terrorist manifesto or his political beliefs.
He was so alone and so careful with the information he gave out, and such a twisted mind. Yeah, obviously there are forums on the internet where people with these kind of opinions exchange opinions, but even there he was kind of careful with exposing his plans and who he was.
Between 2000 and 2010, Anders Breivik transforms himself from a shy, barely noticed contributor to a right-wing online forum to a beefed-up lone wolf on a mission to achieve a global following for his extreme, nationalist and anti-Islamic views. And nobody in authority has spotted him.
If you don't communicate, you can't be seen. Your intentions can't be observed. So, because he wasn't a part of an organized right-wing scene here in Norway, he didn't appear on the radar that was monitoring those communities.
Breivik's manifesto betrays a terrifying level of cunning in the preparations for his own crusade.
He's also a very calculating person. He has a plan for everything, and he has a plan B for the original plan. And he quantifies everything. For every possible outcome, he attributes a numeric probability. And he catalogues various things to do with weaponry and explosives and all kinds of things. So he has a kind of scientific, cold, calculating approach to this, which is unusually cold, unusually calculating, even compared to other terrorists.
And his method is to exalt others to follow his still secret manifesto.
He actually describes in his manifesto how he chose the lone cell or the single cell approach, a cell consisting of one person. Because he has a calculation that, well, if you're a group, the risk of being discovered is much greater than if you're a very small group, and that is even too risky compared to being completely alone.
To his friends, family and colleagues, the young Breivik appears to be just like them. It's part of his plan to blend into the background. Appear politically correct, or at least moderate. Dress normally. Try to limit your rhetorical activities. Avoid excessive forum posting. Excessive forum activity might get you flagged by a national government. Breivik follows his own advice, and by spring of 2009 he's ready to begin an operation to kill as many people as possible, in order to compel millions worldwide to read his manifesto and join his crusade. The countdown has begun to one day in Oslo when no one will be safe.
The beginning of the operational preparations began in the spring of 2009. He set up this company, this agricultural company, and this was a cover for later on purchasing explosives or fertilizer.
Most people who come across Breivik at this time suspect nothing.
I've spoken to many people who met Breivik before he became a terrorist, but in the phase where he prepared for the terrorist attacks. And he came across as a friendly guy, being able to carry a conversation easily, perceived actually to be funny and a good conversationalist until a certain point.
And he is certainly not unattractive to women. Lasse Nordli, a barman, saw him many times in the local pub.
I've seen him or women try to pick him up a couple of times and try to engage in a flirt with him, but he always politely turned them down. Never any hard feelings or anything. He was very, very polite guy.
It's just very strange to think about how he got to the point where he was over 30 years old and had been, planning this for ages. The sick mind had just been growing and growing and growing.
The sick mind was plotting an atrocity the world will never forget. One which will see a generation of young people scarred forever.
I see a young boy there in a pool of blood. And I just stand there, I don't remember for how long, just staring into the wall trying to figure out the situation.
In 2009, Breivik, using the internet to gather materials for his planned atrocity, withdraws from society. He's now living with his mother. He spends hours each day on the computer.
I think World of Warcraft was his main game, and that's what he told people around him. He was taking a year off to play World of Warcraft.
Say you play World of Warcraft, and that you've developed an addiction for it. World of Warcraft is a gothic fantasy adventure game in which players from all over the world can pit their skills against each other online. His motive is not for entertainment, it is for training. He's honing his reactions, testing his marksmanship.
They are simulations of war, and since he sees himself as a warrior, they are important.
It's also providing a cover story in case he's asked why he spends so much time alone. When not gaming, he writes his manifesto, copies quotes from right-wing role models, harvests contacts who might one day be sympathetic to his cause. The next stage of his deadly plan is to acquire the weapons that he needs to carry out an attack. True to his neurotic nature, Breivik is painstaking in his choices and records his actions in great detail in his diary and manifesto. I first started my armour research and acquisition phase 3 months ago, and I found out the hard way that you need special permits to buy military-grade armour from EU stores.
He says that he initially wanted to buy weapons on the black market in Prague. He drove in his own car, stayed there for a week, trying to link up with weapons dealers, but was unsuccessful and returned with no weapons. In the end, he got his weapons in entirely legal ways. He bought a hunting rifle, saying on the application that he would be hunting deer.
Breivik registered a business called Breivik Geofarm and buys chemicals, those used in bomb making. The internet truly transformed the market for the acquisition of any imaginable product. Anyone now has quick and easy access to suppliers worldwide. Ironically, Norwegian law actually assists Breivik in acquiring weapons. As long as he attends the Oslo Pistol Club for training, he can add to his arsenal.
The hardest thing actually in this process was getting the handgun. For that he had to complete training in a shooting club, and he wasn't able to do that until I think December of 2010. So that was kind of the last piece of the puzzle.
Now armed with a high-powered rifle and a handgun, the modern-day self-styled crusader designs a contemporary high-impact weapon to enable his plan. A bomb, and he needs a place to build it. Again, he has a plan, which he details for others to copy.
Starts looking for a location to build the bomb, farm, and he looks at several farms on sale and finds one up in Rena in March 2011. And moves up there and starts the bomb building and the final preparations.
You will have to rent, for example, a rural small farm. Consider renting a property at a remote location where privacy is assured. The property must have a relatively large outhouse where you're able to unload explosives components. Using funds that he claims to have secretly kept before his bankruptcy, he moves to Rena, a remote location about 3 hours north of the capital, a place where he thinks he won't raise suspicion.
He's ordering stuff from tens of different companies around the world. He also has these uniforms made and with these insignia and so on, and these he has made in I think one of them was in Central Europe somewhere and another in Asia. So basically most of his attack equipment was purchased online.
The extreme right-winger notes the details for all to see in his manifesto. When the time is right, crusades are not worth it unless people know.
He records the entire bomb building process, which is I think an 80-day affair. In meticulous detail in his manifesto. A diary, literally, where he says, oh, today I did this and that and the other, and the next day I did that, and day 4 I ran into that problem, wasn't sure how to solve it, I tried this, didn't work, went for that.
With his cover as a farmer, Breivik can obtain the deadly combination of materials that he needs.
The final step was buying the fertilizer, 3 tons of fertilizer, and asking them to transport the fertilizer to the farm where he actually started building a bomb.
Primary explosive company, fertilizer acquirement phase. Other type of WMD, biological chemical, must be considered as a realistic option as well. WMD, weapons of mass destruction, were on Breivik's mind. Farmer Svein Meldeseth was suspicious of his new neighbour. He'd rented this farm because he was going to farm root vegetables, and I told him that would not work because there were too many rocks in the ground. Then he said that was just on top, and then I said that no, that's not only on the top, it's all the way down. So you'll have some problems if you want to grow root vegetables here, because there's only rock here. He didn't agree to that. While Breivik maintains his facade, he regularly eats out, rarely engages with local residents.
He was just sitting by himself, always alone, never with any friends or with anybody else. He was interacting with people and talking with people, but never for a long time. He politely dismissed people and tried to keep himself a little bit for himself.
Chillingly, he also remembers him poring over a website and a collection of his documents.
It was the last week before it happened, the last time he was here. He was sitting right on the other side of the bar by himself for about 2 hours with a computer and just a pile of papers, which we now believe to be the manifest.
Breivik's plans are starting to come together. More fertilizer arrives at his farm as one of the final fatal ingredients for a car bomb. Breivik thinks he has the perfect cover, but local farmer Svein again feels suspicious about his neighbour. I saw that he'd pulled the curtains down, and I thought that was a bit odd, and I also thought the fact that he'd bought fertilizer that stood in the outhouse, that wasn't fertilizer that you used for grass farming. Fatefully, the farmer takes his suspicions no further. As Breivik sits quietly in his local bar, he types the final sentiments of his manifesto. The time has come. for him to unleash hell on his fellow Norwegians. It has been nearly a decade since Anders Behring Breivik decided he needed to take action on behalf of Christian Europe against Muslims, and 3 years since he started detailing precisely what action in his manifesto. The day Anders Behring Breivik had been planning has dawned.
One of the first things Anders Behring Breivik did when he woke up on the same day of the terrorist attacks was to sit down by his computer and send an email to himself. He wanted to check whether or not the email he was preparing to use for the distribution of the manifesto to more than 1,000 individuals in Europe worked properly.
It did work properly.
The main purpose of the operation was to draw attention to the manifesto. So getting the manifesto distributed and posted on the internet was crucial.
On that same morning, the Norwegian Labour Party's youth wing, Arbeidernes Ungdomsfylking, or AUV, was holding its traditional summer camp on one of the prettiest islands near Oslo, Utøya, a place special in the hearts of many young Norwegians.
The island is heart-shaped, and that is everything that goes on there too. You know, it's the love track that you can go up from the sea. All things that are good about being young is captured in that island. It's political interest, but more like kids having guts, kids standing up, kids wanting to change the world.
The activists had gathered to hear from a Norwegian political icon, the country's first female Prime Minister, Gro Harlem Brundtland.
It was a really inspiring morning, and we were kind of looking forward to that day.
To Breivik, those inspired left-of-centre youngsters were a legitimate target. Though he had not specifically mentioned the youth movement AUV, he had described Labour in his manifesto as part of the cultural Marxist elite. Political correctness now looms over Western European society like a colossus. It's taken over both political wings, left and right. He categorised leftists, old and young, as traitors and divided into bands, A to D, so-called multiculturalists. The A group of political leaders, workers for a party like Labour, were B group members. Both had to be punished. Punishment, death penalty and expropriation of property or funds. No one can be spared, male or female. Killing women on the field of battle. Every female category has someone's sister or mother, but then again, so are the victims of the current systems. War isn't pretty. If you're unwilling or incapable of killing women due to principles of chivalry, you should steer away from the armed resistance movements. As the youngsters of the AUV were engaged in political debates, Breivik was taking his operation one stage further.
He told his mother that he would just go out and buy something from an electrical store and that he would see her in the afternoon.
He then went to the car with a bomb in it and started driving to the Prime Minister's office.
We're now in the early afternoon of the 22nd of July. He parked the bombing vehicle in front of the government building.
Even the most meticulously designed schedules can be derailed by people behaving unpredictably. Breivik wanted his bomb to be sighted on the road to completely destroy the government building. This part of the plan didn't quite work perfectly.
When he came up to the Prime Minister's office, that was just a couple of 100 meters further drive, he saw to his dismay that another car was parked where he was planning to park his car with a bomb in the back. He had planned to use the bomb and to set it off in a direction that caused the building to collapse.
Breivik's bomb, 9 years in the planning, 3 years in the making, explodes. 8 people die. 6 are civil servants or government advisors. 2 are, as Breivik would describe them, innocents in the wrong place at the wrong time.
When the bomb goes off, Breivik is listening to a Norwegian national radio channel, and the only thing he's interested in is figuring out whether or not he was successful in creating a structural collapse of the building.
From hearing the reports, Breivik discovers that whilst he's caused death, his bomb has not destroyed the main government building. Plan A had fallen short. His manifesto had prepared for such a setback.
When Anders Behring Breivik realizes that he failed in creating a structural collapse of the building, then he decides to go on to the next level, what he calls Plan B. That involves him driving to Utøya Island and attacking the political summer camp of the Labour youth movement.
From the island, the youngsters could see the smoke rising from the bomb blast. Moments after, texts and calls start to come in.
We were sitting in this kind of small group room, and one of them were just startled and said, oh, Twitter is full of messages about a loud explosion in Oslo, or a loud bang. So we were probably the first to know about it on the island, actually. So we started looking up the different news websites.
Said that, okay, we don't know what this is, and it might be a gas explosion or something, so don't get all upset, no one's dead yet.
The various groups on the island then get a similar message. Whatever had caused the bomb was a good distance away.
So we're just gonna stay at the island, which is the safest place at the whole world right now, and just get the information from the police, and we will all inform you about whatever's happening.
It was the worst advice they could have received. Wearing a Norwegian police officer's uniform, Breivik is in full flow with Plan B.
Drove towards Utøya and was delayed due to a traffic jam. And he also chose a longer route because he expected the main roads to be policed. And then got to Utøya roughly an hour and a half later.
Breivik admitted in his manifesto that the job of killing a point-blank range would be difficult to complete. So he took steps to help him.
He had taken different sort of pills and medication to improve his ability to shoot people dead. He was well aware of the challenges that lied ahead of him.
On arriving, Breivik's policeman uniform helped his progress.
He had with him a lot of guns, equipment, weapons, and said that he was coming to perform a routine check after the terrorist attacks, the bomb in downtown Oslo.
And got on the boat over to Utøya, identified himself as a policeman, loaded his extra equipment with him.
Those on the evocative romantic island of Utøya are about to become part of Anders Behring Breivik's plan to make the world aware of his ideas and his belief that Muslims are taking over Europe and political elites. Even those whose members were teenagers were helping them. Utøya Island is in the Tyrifjorden Lake, 1,600 feet offshore and 24 miles from Oslo. The lake freezes each winter and its water is always bitterly cold. Only a ferry can safely be used to get off the island. Anders Behring Breivik, dressed as a policeman, knows this. Youth members of the Norwegian Labour Party are unaware that they are now his targets.
The General Secretary of Labour Youth said to one of the people in the volunteer gang that if anyone died in the bombing, then there will be no disco tonight.
Breivik's mock police uniform, chosen by him to explain why he was so heavily armed, fails to avoid suspicion. He talks to a police officer on the ferry to the island.
Breivik's story is that he represents Oslo Police District and the Police Security Service. And you can't represent both because it's two separately different organizations. And when the police officer hears his explanation of Breivik's background, the story that Breivik is presenting, he probably knew instantly that something was terribly wrong.
But Breivik, heavily armed, is not challenged. He arrives at Utøya and almost immediately begins shooting.
It sounded exactly like someone was sounding off a toy gun. And I was hearing screams and running and stuff. And I thought, oh, someone's playing a prank in really terrible taste. You know, because everyone was extremely tense about the bombing and everything.
Breivik took advantage of the confusion, telling people that he was a police officer. Breivik started walking from the main building up the hill towards the main camp in the center of the island, and basically killing everyone he came across, shooting them in the head and in the chest. Most people were shot 2 times at least.
With no realistic way of defending themselves, the youngsters hid in whatever cover they could find. Tora Sinding Bakadal had found shelter in a building.
We were just very quiet. I wouldn't have known that it was an hour and a half if it weren't for the fact that I had a clock on my telephone. Because you lose all concept of time in those situations. But it felt like an eternity and an instant at the same time. Very difficult to describe.
As Breivik calmly walked along the tracks of the island, he engages eye contact, then shoots to kill. In the mayhem, Camp Sajini Gudnaratnaran comes across a friend.
First you saw on his face that he saw something horrible, and then he screamed, "Run, run, run," and, hide. And when I turned around, and you saw all the people trying to get into the main building.
The water around the island is bitterly cold, but it offers a form of escape.
A couple of my colleagues happened to be not far away from there, and they could report seeing kids swimming, which wouldn't be natural at all with the weather that was coming up that weekend, and it was very odd.
Across from the island, some of those escaping Breivik could see police uniforms. But how could they trust them when the armed man following them was in a police uniform?
Matti was in the water and was like, "You should swim now." And I was like, "No way, I see the police on the other side, I see the sirens, so I'm not gonna swim. I can't make it." But then we heard the shooting get closer, and far away you could hear people scream because they were shot. You could hear that, and you could hear that bodies fell down. So I finally, decided to swim.
As he hears the screams, sees the dead bodies, Breivik seems unaffected.
He doesn't have anything against the victims personally. It's like a terrorist blowing up a bus. The terrorist group doesn't have anything against the particular individual sitting in the bus. What they want to do is target a broader audience with a particular message, and in that sense, Breivik does exactly that. It's propaganda by the deed.
On land, reporters were talking to parents who were receiving messages from children who did not know if they would live or die.
They showed us text messages, conversations that had by SMS with their kids, saying, there are dead bodies around me, we're being shot at, don't call, I love you, Mom. And then that would be like the last message they got. Other people had actually spoken to the kids out there and being like, I'm hiding in the mountain right now. Mom, he's coming towards me, and then the line would cut.
Breivik wanted to make sure that everyone he was able to shoot was actually dead. And then he moved on. He took advantage at every occasion that he had to present himself as a police officer and trying to get people to cooperate with him and to approach him so he could get a better shot. And when he was done, 69 people were lying dead.
50 minutes after the beginning of his killing spree, Breivik phones police telling them that he's ready to surrender. Armed officers, first called to the scene of the bomb explosion, were speeding from downtown Oslo to board a ferry to the island. As they travel, Breivik phones and gets through to police main headquarters.
Ja, god dagen. Her kommandør Anders Behring Breivik i den norske antikommunistiske motstandsbevegelsen. Jeg er på Utøya for øyeblikket. Jeg ønsker å overgi meg. Ok. Hvilket nummer ringer du fra? Jeg ringer fra mobil. Du ringer fra din mobil? Ja. Det er ikke min mobil, en annen. En annen. Hva heter det for noe? Hallo? Hallo?
Having ended the call, Breivik carries on killing.
As I'd left through the corridor, I'd noticed a young boy who was bleeding profusely. He was still conscious when we ran past him and I made eye contact with him. At the time, I was just, trying to run to safety. So we ran past him. My main priority was just get some bloody ambulance up here.
At 6:27, Breivik surrendered to a SWAT team which had arrived just 2 minutes earlier. He had wanted to kill as many people as possible to create as big a global story as he could. He had succeeded. Very few Muslims were killed by Breivik on July 22nd, 2011. He may have written a manifesto explaining why it was legitimate to launch a war against them, but he'd actually slaughtered those he considered responsible for Muslim integration into European society, government advisors, secretaries, and then he had turned to those who had never taken a decision at government level in their short lives.
The really strange and of course most tragic aspect of this whole operation is his going for young politicians, for children basically. Now we may assume that it has to do with sort of sending a strong signal to the next generation of leaders, the people who will take the most crucial decisions regarding Muslim immigration, in his view.
He has adopted the position that is extreme within extremism, because he said we are already at war and we have to carry out our war against Islam, and especially against the traitors. The traitors being those who are defending multiculturalism and the Social Democratic Party in Norway in particular.
In November 2011, Anders Behring Breivik admitted to a Norwegian court that he had killed 77 people. Breivik's manifesto and video is no longer available on the internet, though some copies were downloaded. In his more lucid moments, he might consider that was a successful outcome.
Next tonight, the blood-curdling crimes of the haircut killer in Witness. Evil Up Close returns tomorrow night with conman, bigamist, thief and paedophile Will Jordan. One to watch out for at 9 on CI.